Okay, so this panel is going to be a little different than the previous panel. We are going to have deeper introductions, then deep dives, a round robin question, and then a Q&A. Any Q&A questions can be submitted in the chat and we will answer them after the panel. Okay, so this panel is the Morris Dancing and Queer Culture panel. The previous was the inclusivity panel that I was on. Again, my name is Tango, so you might recognize me from that. And then we've got the upcoming panels as well. The previous panel discussion was recorded and it is available on YouTube. And then again, today's topic is Morris dancing and queer culture. Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to and want to have relationships with. These attractions can fall anywhere on the sexual orientation spectrum, such as gay, straight, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, and more. Today, we are discussing queer culture. Queer is a term used to encompass the spectrum of identities that are counter to mainstream. This term was previously used as a slur, but has been reclaimed by many parts of the LGBTQ community. Okay, so then the panelists for today are Stephen Levine from Minneapolis, Edwina Cooper and Katie Leach from St. Louis, Sam Kleinman from Brooklyn, New York, and Ruth Temple from San Jose, California. And I'm gonna let the panelists do their own longer introductions.
Was that a handover to me?
It is now.
Call on us by name.
Ellis, hi. Gosh, I'm Stephen Levine, live in the Twin Cities, and I dance Cotswold with Braggarts, and I'm a musician and a singer with Great Northern Border. I didn't start Morris dancing on a team in KID till I was past 40, although I was Morris adjacent for many decades. And when I started dancing, people still seem to think that I'm somebody who's been doing this my whole adult life. They think of me, well, of course, you've always been a Morris dancer. And that's not true. There was a good 20 years wandering in the wilderness. But so the question is why would people think that? And because it seems so right, because me being a Morris dancer is definitely, it just makes perfect sense in terms of who I am and who I want to be with and what I want to do. So really the question is, why wasn't I a Morris dancer? I graduated college in the late 70s, moved to Boston. Even then I was Morris adjacent. I grew up folky. My aunt was close friends with I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I probably knew all the Morris dancers, but I had no interest in being part of that. I mean, so I arrived in Boston, young college graduate. Why no Morris? And the answer is, well, there's another adjective there. I arrived to Boston, a young gay college graduate. And in that adjective was kind of the reason why Morris dancing didn't seem right to me. And I want to talk a little bit about that, about what changed and what it looked like and what it looks like for me now. So in looking at those things, there are two things that are part of this. One is what's inside me, as in what I'm needing, what I needed, what I'm looking for, what I enjoy, what I need at any particular moment, or want at any particular moment. And the other part is what I call what's outside me, what's actually happening in the Morris dance community. So there's the two things. So I get to Boston, 1979, I guess, at that point. Well, and what was I looking for? What do any of us look for to join a Morris dance team or when we find Morris dancing? I mean, I definitely was looking for a sort of world where you dance with people as a way of being with them, where you sing songs, where you make your own culture that's not commodified. And Morris dancing, I certainly knew about it, definitely would have been part of that. But also at the time, for I think very obvious reasons, what I needed most of all was also to feel part not just of a community, but of a gay community. In particular, to abstract this, what I needed then, what I need to this day, was the feeling that I am not alone. Being gay, being aware that I was gay from the age of 5, being out from the age of 15, the through story of all of that was that I felt absolutely alone about it. Not unsocial. I was not. I mean, but there was just something about being gay that made me feel alone. Very important to me that I not feel alone. So what's happening outside me, as in the Mars community? And there are these great Mars teams that were doing great dancing then, and they just seemed too straight for me. Now, to be fair, the entire world was too straight for me. There was no difference in the Mars team, but nonetheless, it just no. These are straight. This seemed to be just part of the ethos. That first year in Boston, I used to go contra dancing every week. I remember that Thursdays driving home. I used to drive the van pool for work. And I was like shaking with excitement every Thursday because it was Contra night. That's how much I love going to Contra. And that just after a year, basically, that felt too straight for me. It just wasn't what I was looking for. And it's not that I felt that any individual said or did anything. There were no strange, homophobic, awkward moments, but it was still a time, hard as this might be to remember, when you couldn't just say you were gay, where it sort of felt like an awkward thing. And I had just come from 5-6 years, again, impossible for people to kind of get this now, but of being everybody's first gay friend. Now, I mean, that's really nice, most of these people are still friends of mine half a century later, but I kind of had enough of that. I kind of needed to be somewhere where I'm not the first gay friend, where being gay is not something where there's a bit of yay, I mean, just to be somewhere that felt right. This wasn't easy. Obviously, I'm looking for what they call community, or what I now want to say, wanting not to feel alone. And that wasn't an easy thing to find either. I mean, I wasn't, it took several years. And ultimately, I helped start a gay and lesbian marching and concert band in Boston, became very involved in a national organization of gay bands, found that community that I'd been looking for from the time I was able to articulate that. And of course, for the same reasons that I would have loved Mars dancing. You're finding community because of people you are making music with. You're finding community, and it was men and women. And it was, at that time, we would have said gay and lesbian, but it really did encompass more than that. But I want to sort of rewrite the words we used for it at the time. And for 20 years, that was like, made me very happy. And I traveled all around. And what I used to say was that the very thing that made me feel not a part of the world that I lived in, that made me feel an alien on my own planet, that same thing was now what made me feel completely connected to people all around the country. I mean, nothing changed in the reality, just it became the gateway to community. So how does that relate to Mars? Ultimately, I started Mars dancing because of the band. We'll get there, but it's a quick story. So what changed? How did I go from Mars is straight, and even though it would be right for me, I have this band, yet here I am. I could probably dance 6 traditions at this point. So what changed? First of all, I moved to Minnesota around 1988. And partly when you move like that, it's a time of new beginnings, and it's a time of sort of resettling things, even though it doesn't feel like that at the time. And I moved to Minnesota because of the gay and lesbian band connections, because of the people I knew in the band. Within my first week here, I was like chair of a band conference that we're going to host the next year. But also moving to Minnesota, I was also at that point in my life, I mentioned that I grew up folky. I kind of ran away from that for a while. And I was rediscovering this. And my friend Lynn Knoll, who many of you know, said, when you get to Minnesota, find the Morris dancers at the Renaissance Festival and just say you're Lynn's friend and they'll sing with you. And it wasn't quite that direct, but that was close enough. So from the time I got to Minnesota, the folky world was becoming part of things again. It's how I became even more Morris adjacent than ever. And so that changed. But to get back to what's going on the inside, what's going on the outside. By that point, and certainly after another 5-6 years, I had at that point decades of not feeling alone. I'd had decades of being part of a community where you didn't have to think one way or the other about whether you were gay or queer or not. It sort of almost gives you the strength to be part of the straight world. So that was sort of happening inside. But outside, I moved to Minnesota, and there already was gay and lesbian gay and dance, which Ruth might talk about a little, I don't know.
Mhm.
There was gay and lesbian
Take this
contra,
time.
and that from the one of my ways of meeting people and finding friends here, and the way it brought contra back to me. The way I used to be so excited every week to go to the VFW hall for contra, I was like, I can't wait. It's only once a month to go to St. Stephen's Church and I'll be doing contra dancing. So there was that, and it was gay and lesbian and more. But as I say, that would have been the words at the time. And also, not too many years later, there was a gay and lesbian Morris side, which Ruth will definitely be talking about, Moonwood Morris. I never danced on Moonwood, but as I say, then I was already Morris adjacent, but so I knew everybody. But I did the apprentice class. You know, there was inside of me,
Mhm.
I was okay with the straight world. The straight world finally came up to snuff. And then, but also there were these other things that were changing.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah.
Are you getting close enough to being done with your introduction so we can move on to the next?
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I didn't have my little clock here. So that changed. And then somebody had seen me play the drum, invited me to play the drum at May Day. I got invited to be a drummer for a Morris team. And from there, once I got invited, and slowly and gradually, we moved into being the Morris man or the Morris dancer that I always sort of felt I should be. And so I think I'll sort of stop there because I think I've gone more than my 7 minutes. I didn't think it was so much my introduction as my part of the panel, but yes, I went over my time.
Okay.
Perfect,
Anyway,
Stephen. Thank you.
That was probably
And
enough.
Ruth is next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ruth Temple. I was living in the Twin Cities when I started Morris dancing. I had come out in college in the welcoming arms of the feminist academia. And it took me another decade to find Morris, although I was a folk dancer and a folk musician and involved in the folk scene, helped produce a women's music series at the Coffee House Extempore weekly during its day. Gotten involved with the Lesbian Gay and Dance Coordinating Committee. So yes, we had this queer contra dance that was doing gender blind calling, not the larks and ravens that you will encounter these days, but more of let's call that move a right hand star. There's some excellent callers who started their calling in those days, Carol Ormond among them. But that was kind of a core where we pulled when Dan Heine, who was my housemate at the time, got a grant to go off to English Week at Pine Woods Dance Camp through the CDSS and the MTM Combined Scholarship. Went off to that, came back with the idea of starting a Morris team and Sword. And we got a few people together and talked about it for a while. I love the comment from Miss Sally Gordon, who is one of the co-instigators, saying, okay, as a queer team, it doesn't mean we're going to limit who can be on the team. They can come out straight if they need to, but the identity of the team is we're Queer Morris. There was some concern from elders and teachers in MTM. I remember Ed Stern having chats with Dan about being concerned about, okay, are you going to be pulling new team members from the existing teams? Because there's already 4 teams in the Twin Cities. And the answer to that was not really, although some of us were on multiple teams. I had started dancing, hi Julia, with Uptown. And so this was later that summer. Dan had gone off to camp and come back. And we got going late in '89. and had a sword team ready for the Midwinter Ale already in 90, although we didn't dance out at the Morris Ale until, again, that year in the Minnesota Ale in 1990. We were pulling from the queer contra dance. Dan put this lovely, long, tiny little classified ad in the back of Equal Time News, which was an every 2 weeks queer publication that looked a lot like, oh, say, City Pages or the Metro in different markets, but little independent thing. And asked for, basically explained a little bit about what Morris dancing was, and asked for musicians and dancers, and asked for a 2-year commitment. And we got like 18 or so people right away, and we were up in the team in the mid-20s of numbers by that next year. So we had a pretty good side. As Stephen said, we had folks who did come in from other types of folk dance, from other places in queer community. And it was such a delight and relief to have, here's this queer presence, and it's not about who are you with? It's let's relax into dancing. Let's just shut up and dance. And we did. We got people who had not played for the Morris who came in and played. And then while there was talking and teaching going on, would be over in the corner playing trios and classical music together and fell in love. And as far as I know, they're still together. We're out of touch. Anybody who's in touch with our first musicians, give me a holler. But we had a few really good years. That first couple years, we also had a nice pagan overlap, and we happened to dance out on each of the pagan 8 sacred days of the cross quarters and quarters of the solstices, equinoxes, and the days that are halfway between those. It just happened that way. Practicing on a Sunday morning often. We're given practice space in Gary Schulte's downtown St. Paul warehouse for a while. Thank you, Julia. I'll connect with you later. And come nice weather, we practiced out in city parks, from Prospect Park to Powderhorn to Loring Park. Remember one year, couple years in, practicing at Powderhorn, and these kids are dancing or looking at us dance and come up on their bicycle and say, "What's your niche?" And it took us a minute to figure out what's he asking? Oh, okay, what's your niche? Oh, we're doing Morris dance. It's this unbroken tradition, folk dance, performance dance thing. One time we were practicing in Loring Park, and here's these lovely elders out enjoying the sun, asking, what are you doing? What's this dance? And we say, we're getting ready to we stomp on the ground and bang with our sticks to wake up the earth. And these native elders nod and smile and say, we dance for the same reason. And so it was lovely to have different venues to perform in. So queer rallies and pride, and I guess everybody who could did Powderhorn Park May Day. So we were in the parade there. That was one of those years, was the year it got rained out for the first time since it had begun. And Dan was on the phone saying, "So, short kit?" Because we had shorts for a summer kit. And it was put off a week, and that was amazing enough that an event that size could just sort of say, "Oh, we'll do it next week." Did it. So there's all kinds of stories like that. we were dancing out Halloween and did the Abbott's Brumbling Horn dance in Minnehaha Park. And by the time we had finished, the lovely patrol car had pulled out because the folks at the hayride at the other end of the park had called in, "Who are these weirdos?" And so we had a wonderful time saying, this is what we are, what we do. And that was actually a lovely interaction. It's like, you're educating is, I guess what you do when you're in a rare and marvelous folk tradition. And I don't know, I guess that's it. I moved on from Morris dance after a few years. Our third year, I picked up the fiddle to play for dance because our first musicians were wandering off doing family things with each other. And I've stayed with that and I've been a musician for Morris the rest of my life. And that I owe to the Twin Cities Morris community is that sense. Jim Leadham, I remember saying about when you play an instrument, you play your own team's repertoire, but learn everybody else's, because you never know if somebody's going to get in trouble or not be able to be there. And so I've been able to step in at Ailes. Somebody's musician wasn't able to come when we were down in Indianapolis one year. Give me a notice to time. Okay.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah. And being able to play for other teams made it easy to move to California. I was moving for love and knew one person and had a contact for, I think there's a new team in Santa Cruz these couple years. And I actually hooked up with the new four of that team driving home from setup for the Renaissance Fair down here. And on the way home, because it's a couple-hour drive, and she had misconnected with her ride, said, "Oh, we're going to Santa Cruz. That's easy." And so partway home, singing. She's like, "We know a lot of music in common." Well, yeah, I come from the Morris community, and that was when it dropped that we were all Morris dancers, and so that was my into the Morris team, which is a lovely way to come into a new community. With Stephen, it was the Freedom Bands, and for me, it was Morris dance. And by that time, okay, yep, that's a good start.
Thank you, Ruth. And Sam, you are next.
Sweet. Hey everyone, I'm Sam. I grew up Morris dancing. Hi Julie. I grew up Morris dancing. I started Morris dancing in St. Louis when I was 14 on the Capering Roysters, which was a sort of thing that my family did all together. So like we all started at the same time. So I have friends who like actually grew up Morris dancing and were on kids teams and that sort of thing, which was not at all my experience. I've been going to the Midwest Morris Ale every year since 2002, I think, the year with the really pink t-shirts. And then I moved to after college, I moved to the East Coast and began dancing with local teams. Don't brag, Judy. And I'm like reading the comments at the same time. But I've been coming for a long time. Morris dancing has been a huge part of my life. I think that like I have this line that like when I moved to New York City in 2011, it was sort of a like, okay, you like get your all your utilities hooked up, you get, you know, like, and then you like find out when the Morris dancers are practicing so you can like go to practice, because like one of the things that you should do as an adult in a place is like be a part of the local Morris team. Maybe you don't go to every practice or go to every gig, but like you need to have people who you can show up and dance Morris with on May Day. And so uh, I've been dancing in on the Bowery Boys since 2010, the fall of 2010, which has been lovely. And the Bowery Boys are a lovely team. And I think actually like there's a way in which like it's very weird as someone who grew up on a mixed team to like be dancing on a team which is like all men, and that's a like weird, it's like it's a weird and kind of uncomfortable in some ways experience. The Bowery Boys have this like very macho uh vibe, and it's I've like, you know, of course come to learn that like there are like queer founding Bowery Boy members, but I, you know, like it took years for me to learn that like the Bowery Boys are a very like are a delightful team. I also you know, like people would show up, you know, like you would be like dancing and so, you know, and there's this person would show up to a stand, and the Bowery Boys stands are all sort of perfect in this like utterly sublime way, and so you'd be dancing over the sunset on the Brooklyn Promenade and everything would be beautiful and perfect, and there'd be this person doing a dance you'd never seen before in your life, and you're like, I've been coming to practices for years, like who is this guy? And they're like, that's, you know, so, you know, that's a founding member, and you're like, oh cool, and so there's like it's that's been a sort of interesting thing to like be a part of. I also, because I'm a like, despite the fact that I've been in New York for a decade, I'm like a Midwest Morris Ale dancer forever, and so I in 2010 or 9, I guess, like with a bunch of sort of the like my generation of Midwest Morris Ale attendees, like started this team called Brain Trust, which has been coming to the ale for a really long time, and Brain Trust is this like I like strung a bunch of words together in the bio, but the idea is like, but it is in fact like a queer majority team, or all queer question mark. I would like need a spreadsheet and like some like deep questions to like be really clear on that, but I think one of the things that like I think of as a Morris dancer is, and about Morris dancing, is that like this, at least for me, is very much like not an erotic experience, and maybe that's because I grew up doing this like with my family, and because like Morris communities in places that I've lived tend to be really small, right? Like the Morris community in St. Louis is very small. The Morris community in Philadelphia is also pretty small. The New York community is a little bit bigger, but it doesn't really feel like it. And there's also, I think, something about like being the like, you know, like there aren't so many like gay men in my like age bracket, that it just somehow doesn't sort of feel like a place where like there's a lot of I like where there's a lot of erotic tension like floating in the air. Like Morris dancing is really fun, I really enjoy it, but I don't like, you know, like if, you know, in the way where like, and I think that's actually like one of the, I've done other kinds of folk dancing, like, you know, I used to contra dance quite regularly, and that contra dancing was also a place where there is a lot of erotic energy sort of floating about. And it was also sort of alienating because like my experience of that erotic energy, as it were, was like very different than everyone else's experience of that. And like I've gone, like I have lots of queer contra dancing friends. I've like contra danced in queer situations. Like there's something kind of different about Morris that I find makes it more approachable, and a reason why I like continue to like enjoy it in the way that I do. So that's kind of like my story. And I would like to pass the torch, I think, to Edwina.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And Rita, it is your turn.
Oh gosh, it's me now. Okay. Uh, well, I'm the youngest panelist, the newest panelist. I'm sure many of you have never seen me or met me before, and I likewise have not seen or met many of you. I'm Edwina Cooper. I have been dancing for only about 4 years. I dance with River Rats, Border Morris in St. Louis, and the Capering Roysters, which is our Cotswold team here in St. Louis. So I'm a pretty good segue from Sam, who started here in St. Louis and has moved on, and I've now, you know, I wouldn't say I'm a good Sam replacement at all, but but I am here. So my introduction to sort of carry off of the past couple of panelists were starting to talk about community, and that is there is no better place to start for me talking about my experience of being a queer person in the Morris community and my relationship between those identities of being both a Morris dancer and being a queer person, because this is the first community where I was out. I'm pan, by the way, if we're talking about if we're talking you know, exact labels. And identifying with a polysexuality, being pan or bi, or I'm sure there are others. It's hard to find community even within queer spaces sometimes. There's still a lot of pressure that, oh, well, you're not really queer, or you're not queer enough if you're not gay, or you're not lesbian, if you're, you know, if you haven't wholly divorced yourself from straight culture, or just that ideas of biphobia exist, unfortunately, within all communities. And so I was a little reluctant, sorry about that, a little reluctant to put myself out there. And I was also isolated for other reasons, not related to being a queer person at all. And I, even though I agree very strongly with Sam's assertion that this is not an erotic space, nor I think should it be, I did enter Morris with romantic pursuits in mind, which is quite unusual, especially queer romantic pursuits. But if you didn't know previously, I am actually married to our president, to the president of the Midwest Morris Ale Board. That is my wife, Katie. And I started Morris dancing to date her. That's just true. That's just accurate. And what was really cool for me, what was really exciting then about the Morris community, especially specifically the community here in St. Louis, was Katie was known to our St. Louis home team. She'd been dancing for, I think Katie's been dancing 8 years. I could be wrong about that. She can correct me later. But she is good friends with Sam's parents. I had only met Katie through college, and I came in wanting to spend more time with her and kind of see where our relationship would go. And no one cared at all. They were kind of like, cool, you're Katie's friend, possibly girlfriend, pick up a stick. And that was incredibly relieving and reassuring, to have people just kind of go, oh, that's nice. okay, cool. Let's do this. And for the focus to be entirely on the activity that we were doing as a group, and to have people accept me as a newcomer, as a queer person, as an entire stranger. You know, my family doesn't have a folk background. I haven't even lived in St. Louis that long compared to some people who are really from St. Louis. And it's been so wonderful. It has been strengthening and empowering, and just that sense of community that Stephen and Ruth and Sam have all touched on, that has existed for me, and it has helped me overcome some difficult things and be faithful to who I am, to give me confidence, and has celebrated with me in the marriage that I have with my wife, in you know, my first couple of ales, which were a wild and at times rocky experience for me, but everyone has wanted me to be here. Everyone has either in words or in actions been encouraging to me, even in difficult times. And I just wanted to highlight that and to express to everyone my gratitude, but to also, you know, raise a cheer to what our predecessors have done, the good work that you have done in making an accepting space, and an encouraging space, and also in the joy we now get to share together, and the celebrations we now get to have together, in benefit of that work, and in continuing to move that along, in always wanting to meet new people, and to help people be their best selves, and to appreciate who they are. That has been my experience with the Morris community, and very specifically with the Morris community here in St. Louis. I have nothing but kind words, and I think that's the best I can do for my introduction. Everyone's welcome to ask me more questions about the nonsense I've been talking about later, but I think that'll do for me for my introduction.
All right, thank you, Edwina, and thank you, everybody. So now we will get into our deep dive, and whoever wants to start with their topic can go first.
Choke.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I was like scrolling through the other thing. Yeah. Why don't you go, Ruth? I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just starting back in the history. That is so true about the welcoming nature of the folk community and the Morris community in particular. I mean, I first noticed Morris dancing as something important in the world and in my life eventually back in, what were those first couple of years when the Renaissance Fair was a community festival out in Jonathan, Minnesota? What was the first year you came up, Ed? I don't remember. It was, I know that MTM started in '74. So it might've been then, and it might've been earlier, just on a come up to dance for the weekend kind of basis. But then to grow up and see, okay, folk dance is a big thing in my life. Excellent, let's go dancing. Back in the days when we could do nearly every night of a dance at Tapestry Folk Dance Center, then as the Lesbian dance came along in the mid 80s, having that welcoming space where people could come. And it was interesting to see the overlap between queer contra and folks saying, I want to dance more than just once a month, coming over into the traditional folk dance scene and changing that a little bit, opening things up a little bit. And somebody asked me at some point in our planning session here, why then? So I think Moonwood Morris happened in a very special place and time. With the AIDS crisis going on, it became an important thing to be out and to be creating community, supporting one another, but also just being visible to let some of those other really important conversations happen. So that's part of what was going on with why there was Equal Time News, how and why there was a queer contra dance as a parish event at St. Stephen's Catholic Church, which amuses me to this day as one of the folks on the coordinating committee of it, was that that's his insurance we were on, even much to the consternation of the Minnesota State Bishop at the time. Thank you. But then that there was enough of a Morris scene also that we could triangulate and create and have a queer Morris team. And so have the queer community to dance for, the folk music and dance community, particularly the Morris community, to dance with. You know, from and in places that have like one team, you might not know this special thing about the Twin Cities, where all the different teams that are dancing in a particular year get together on May Day morning and start with that circle dance from Abram and do breakfast together, run off and perform wherever they're going to perform during the day, come back together for dinner. I hope most of that is still happening. But that there is, it's not just this little isolated thing, but that it's within community, within communities, within overlapping communities. Such a cool deal. I don't know if I'm taking that anywhere else, but that little gem of how special that community was and is. There's Julia
Yeah.
in the comments with every night a dance.
That's wonderful, Ruth. Was that all you wanted to say about that?
I think that is just, this existed and it came to be in that special time and place because it could.
Yeah. All
And that's
right.
enough. It's enough just to notice that going by.
I want
Excellent,
to add
thank
something sort
you.
of historical perspective here, which
Yeah.
is that things that don't seem radical to us now were extraordinarily radical 25, 30 years ago. To have a gay and lesbian Morris team, to have a gay and lesbian marching
Yes.
band was felt like an extremely powerful and in some ways dangerous political statement.
It was.
And
It
you know,
was.
because you can't, you still couldn't, I mean, you had to have stationery printed up that said gay and lesbian. You'd walk into the stationers a little bit trembling. I mean, that was the world we lived in. We didn't even recognize what it was doing to us.
Yeah.
but-
Or we did.
Or we
You
did,
know,
and that's why we
I did the calendar for Equal Time News for the first 3 years it existed. And there's, I've forgotten his name, who worked in the typesetting, who didn't come into work for a month because he had been beaten up. That happened all the time. So just being out, being queer in community, more dangerous for men, I think. Whereas being able to come out in the late 70s, early 80s into the radical feminist whatever of, you know, the English department at the University of Minnesota, it's like, you know, nearly expected of one, was itself powerful and empowering. And to be able to give that kind of welcoming creative space to people by having a newspaper, by having a dance of our own, by having a Morris team of our own, was rare marvelous. Carry on.
Stephen, do you want to go into your deep dive topic?
No, because Ruth did. I want to go into Sam's deep dive topic. It'll just be very quick, I promise this time. which is finding community in a non-erotic space and getting back to lesbian, gay, and dance. I spoke before about how exciting it was to for me once a month to have this gay contra, which is related to Gay Mars. I don't mean to be moving it away from the Midwest Mars Sale. And I was meeting new people, many of whom are my friends to this day. And one night, like, I don't know, 6-10 months into it, on my way home, it occurred to me that not once over the course of the evening had I danced with another man. Meaning, I danced every dance, and I danced with friends of mine that I knew through this, and I'd had this great contra dance time. And I thought, that's right, I'm going to a gay and lesbian contra dance so that I can dance with women. My point being community, my point being not feeling alone, my point being what this meant in the having gay, lesbian, queer presence in contra, presence in Mars teams was quite divorced in most, always to me, but in most ways from anything erotic. I think that's really a key point.
And I guess like that, like this, like the sort of connection between the like erotic experience of a thing, and which is like, which I sort of use in this like kind of abstract way. But the thing that it's kind of interesting, or the thing that like I like think about a little bit is like well, like there are definitely like Morris dancing is not the queerest. I mean, Morris dancing is not the queerest folk hobby that I have, right? Like I do like lots of you know, like going to like the Balkan Dance Festival in Brooklyn in January is like full of queer people in a way that like Morris dancing is like, yeah, like that's how it, like that's a thing, I guess, sure, you know, which is weird because I'm on this like queer majority team that gets, you know, like has sets of 12 people and stuff. But and I mean, maybe I'm fine with that. You know, like there are, you know, like Shape Note singing in New York City is like, has like way more queer men than like any Morris event that I have ever been at, which is like by proportion, you know, like, and that's like, and I've often found that like very kind of like, oh, this is a weird way in which I can like do something that like, you know, do this music or dancing thing, and also like, you know, like hang out with a bunch of queer men in a way that like feels weird in other sorts of contexts. I also think that like there is this like cohort aspect which I think shapes a lot of our experience of this, like where does this activity feel or like land on this like this like on this like spectrum, as it were. And so like the like, you know, like I know that like I have friends who go to like the Marlboro Ale in my sort of general age group and have a like much different experience than I do, because like, you know, these are people that they've been going to camp with for their whole lives, and they are, you know, like as I said, like they actually, you know, they have this like there's this big young people community in parts of the East Coast that like meant that that some people had this like cohort that they felt a part of. And that's a thing that like I, you know, in a lot of ways I think that like my team is like the cohort, and there are like the 12 of us or so, or however many. And I think that like shapes some of this experience. Like there's both the community that you're part of, and then the people who are your people. And I think that matters in terms of experience.
Absolutely. Edwina, would you like to weigh in more on that topic?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in a little bit just to like the necessity of having a multiplicity of queer spaces. You know, there's no such thing as too many queer spaces, and that queer spaces are for a multiplicity of things. You know, there are queer spaces that are for romantic relationships, for finding a partner, and then there are queer spaces that are for just existing while queer. And for me, and I think my fellow panelists have also been speaking to this a little bit, one of the really radical and revolutionary things about Midwest Morris is that this is sort of an existing while queer space, which is really relieving. As I talked about earlier in my introduction, some queer spaces, there's a pressure to perform in a certain way, whether that's in terms of gender or whether that's in terms of some overt sexuality, sexiness. And that pressure is less felt here. And I think that's a good thing. I've certainly struggled to find what I'm calling existing while queer spaces. And that's something I really value here and find comforting. And again, not to say that we don't also need queer spaces that are for more romantic or more performative outlets, but that we need all types of queer spaces, and it's just been really cool to be a part of that, and for people of all identities, straight, queer, to be accepting and indeed encouraging of that, at least in my limited and again very new experience. I can only speak to what's happened in the last 5 years or so, but I would like to think that my positive experiences reflect well on the work that my predecessors have done, and I hope this was one of the goals that all of you had when in thinking about how do I be queer in more spaces. How do I make that space safe? How do I make that space encouraging and inviting? And I hope that is reflected in my experience.
Excellent, thank you. I feel like we already kind of touched on all the round robin questions. I had some stashed in my back pocket if I felt like we hadn't talked about some of those, but I feel like we kind of hit those answers already. So if people just want to keep talking about more deep dives, topics they didn't feel like were addressed, feel free to go ahead.
Again, I know we're at the end of the hour and I'll try to be really quick, but this was one of the round robin things that had come up, which is about being supported as a queer Morris dancer. You know, when you tell an anecdote of something that happened decades ago, that involves people you know, and this involves Ed Stern, you know that other people won't remember, the other person won't remember it the same way at all. You know that you probably have the details wrong, and it probably doesn't matter because I know at the core I have this right. I remember standing next to Ed, and I think it was at the Renaissance Festival when Moonwood was new, watching Moonwood dance, and Ed asking me, starting to ask me, you know, a question about why the team would have formed. I mean, wasn't in a way that was, you know, critical at all, but he started to say that, and a part of me was, you know, it's like, you know, my little, like getting a little tense here. It's like, wait, where's this going? And he finished it by saying, I mean, do they not feel welcome in the Morris community? Is there something we should be doing that we're not doing? You know, I mean, and I said, oh, no, it isn't that. And I said something about community, and he said, oh no, that makes sense, whatever. But that one, starting to say a question that I'm nothing to do with Ed. It's a whole lifetime of feeling that you're going to be attacked. Nothing to do with that. But starting to go there, it was like, okay, is there going to be something here about what, you know, why are you doing this? Leading into that, absolutely the right question. Is there something we're not doing to make people feel welcome? Is there something we could be doing better? As I say, I'm sure Ed remembers that differently. But at the core, that to me has been part of what felt like acceptance in the Morris community in Minnesota to the upstart young queers coming in, is that their concern was always, are we making you feel welcome enough? Not what can we do to make you feel less welcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also honored to be called an upstart young queer by Stephen Levine. That's going on a badge.
Yes, it should. Or not.
we should all get badges that say that.
Yeah.
You know, some of us need upstart elder dancers.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think that it's also like the case that like the way in which like queer people exist in this community has like changed a bunch, both in terms of like the, like we didn't, Brain Trust wasn't explicitly like, oh, and we need to start a queer team, but like we did. It turns out we did that. And like there, like Steven's, I have this like clear memory of watching a half gay braggart set and sort of being like, I am observing a moment in history, which I was like, I have this vivid memory of like that happening and watching it with Spider and sort of saying like, oh, this is a thing, there are teams that have sort of made that jump. And I think it's like, of course it changes, and of course like it's always sort of like, one of my experiences of Morris is that like it's sort of like the same people and different sometimes there are like influxes of new people, but like it's like often sort of like these people are gonna sort of recombine in a new and different way, and being part of this like this community that's like larger than just the community of a team has been, and that like is the like Morris, like this is why our like introductions were all like, and then I moved to this place and there were Morris dancers, which happened in 3 of our little stories. So I think that's like definitely a theme and a thing that I've like found compelling, but it's also a thing that's like kind of hard to get into, right? Like all of our stories were like, and then we had to spend the like, I've been doing this for so long that like at that point I became like a member of this community, and there is this like feeling of like always still being a little bit of an outsider, which I don't think is like explicitly queerness related, but is maybe perhaps like Morris related, because like we are part of this community which has these like very long tenures, and so you have this like, I need to be a Morris dancer for 25 years before I'm like real, which, is an absurd idea that like, yeah. And Julie, I think age totally is related to all of this. So.
Okay, we are getting close to the end of our recorded time here. So let's everybody go around quick and say some closing remarks.
I just did.
Stephen, do you have one?
Yeah, to reiterate what I said before about the importance of not feeling alone. If there's anything that makes me feel not alone, especially during this pandemic time, it is being with my Morris dancing friends. And the idea to come from a time where being gay made me feel completely alone, to the fact that being gay doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but I don't feel alone, and it's about something else entirely. That's what Morris dancing is to me, not feeling alone.
Excellent. Ruth, do you have one as well?
Following on from that, I'm remembering an old New Yorker cartoon from some Pride Week years and decades ago, where saying, we're here, we're queer, we're used to it. And I think the we is that greater us of the big community. And I'm so grateful for that. Thank you all for being part of my Morris community. Even in years where my health doesn't let me caper and jump like that anymore, but I can still swing a fiddle if there's a team. Keep dancing, keep playing.
Perfect. Thank you, Ruth. Edwina, anything else you'd like to add?
I just hope that we continue that sense of community, not feeling alone, feeling that sense of gratitude towards each other, acceptance. That's very hard to do right now, the pandemic, with all this being virtual, and I just look forward to one we're all physically together again, and it'll be so fun and rewarding to physically celebrate together who we are, and especially who we are together.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. So now, Vanessa, I will have you stop the recording.